The housing market is crashing in Canada. We've got the evidence of that happening, and the Canadian banksters are lying to you. And we're going to get into why they're doing that and what exactly is going on. How it's very similar, in fact, to the financial crisis in the United States back in 2008. So, mortgage wars looming as some Canadians take advantage of lower rates. So, really, what I want to get into in this article is a couple of things that different bank CEOs actually said in Canada. So the heads of Canada's top banks expect more mortgage holders to be able to renew at lower rates over the next 2 years as the lenders compete for a larger share of the market. So that all sounds great, but as we'll get onto, it's not so rosy as the picture that they're trying to paint here. Now, why would they be trying to paint such a rosy picture? It's because they know how bad things are right now, and basically they're trying to change sentiment, and also they don't want to obviously put fear out there about their bank because they're paid in proportion to what happens with their stock price. So it's pretty hilarious, but basically you're never going to get the exact truth, even though sometimes they do slip up and say it. So Royal Bank of Canada Chief Executive Dave McKay said that 60% of the bank's customers will renew at lower rates in 2025. We're going to get into that in a second, because when you hear something like that, you think, oh yeah, okay, so they're going to actually be taking on lower rates than they had in 2020, let's say. No, complete opposite of that, in fact. They're just saying lower rates compared to last year's rates. So it's a completely different thing, and the way they've spun that web is pretty good, actually. So these numbers don't imply that Canadians aren't struggling with their payments now, he said, but the risk of not being able to absorb higher mortgage payments has come down. When we look at the cohorts that have higher payments, look at the overall payment shock, it has decompressed significantly, he said at an RBC Capital Markets Canadian Bank CEO conference on Tuesday. Okay, so let's get into the interest rates and what exactly happened. So if you go back 5 years here to 2020, you can see that the overnight rate was at 0.25%. And basically with the overnight rate at 0.25%, you have mortgage rates that were very low. Now the 5-year fixed rate took a while to come down, but it's still a lot higher than it was back in 2020, way higher than it was back in 2020. And if you look at what's happened with interest rates, yeah, they've come down to 3.25%. But what you've seen happen is, for instance, with the 5-year fixed rate mortgage, which is based off this government bond yield, which I'm looking at right now. So there's also a risk premium, and it's more complicated than that, but that's just a simplified explanation of it. But if you look at what happened in 2020, this was trading around 0.34%. And if you look at where it is right now, it's hovering around 3%. Obviously, they're going to continue to cut here, but if you take a look at what's happened over the past 6 months, it did initially drop when they started cutting, but they have been cutting all the way through this, and it's just maintained pretty much along the same course. It's by no means at the lows. So obviously you'd be expecting that, hey, this is going to be at the lows right now because they're cutting rates. But obviously this is a great example of how the Bank of Canada doesn't actually control interest rates. You know, a lot of people are fooled to believe that these central banks control everything, but this is literally proof that they don't. They just control that overnight rate. More and more people this year, as this article is saying, are coming up for renewal. So they're going to have to renew into these higher rates. And you can see here from what this TD Bank CEO says that a lot of them actually renewed at even higher rates. So Toronto Dominion Bank's Chief Operating Officer Raymond Chun said about a third of the mortgages coming up for renewal in 2025 and 2026 were also renewed in the past few years. So again, they're trying to paint this picture here that everything is fine, but when you look at actually what is going on, it's not the case at all. So again, the Financial Post, same actual media company, comes out with this article, which basically is a survey of what people can afford when it comes to their mortgage. And well, it's pretty shocking, and it actually shocked even the person writing this article. So housing affordability was a major thorn in the side of Canadians in 2024, and it promises to hurt just as much in 2025. a new survey suggests. With the gap between what people say they can comfortably pay for mortgages and rent and what they are paying hitting some astronomical spreads. And that is the main thing here. So get this, 2/3 of those surveyed by Ledger for mortgage comparison site everyrate.ca said they could afford a monthly housing costs of $17.49 a month, which is almost 5% less than the national average monthly mortgage payment of $18.29 based on CMHC data. Almost 4 in 10 said they could only manage $1,000 a month. So these people are being hit by the massive amount of layoffs, the economic downturn that obviously is occurring in Canada and is just going to continue in 2025. I mean, just extrapolate the trend and think about what's happening right now. And that's the same that you're going to see with all this data, which is actually lagging 3 to 6 months behind. And even when you get into the higher income earners, it's exactly the same things, guys. So even high income earners, those making more than $100,000 a year, are hurting, with 42% saying they can't comfortably manage monthly payments higher than $17.49 a month. So think about it here. Even what they're calling high income earners here, they cannot comfortably manage the average monthly mortgage payment. So what do you think is going on? Well, we know what's going on. If you look at places like Toronto and Vancouver, which are some of the most expensive markets in Canada, they have been absolutely whacked. The housing prices have really took a hit, especially those at the high end of the market. Those are the ones that have been most affected. You're also seeing more foreclosures. You're also seeing more power of sales, which is exactly what you would expect when you're in the demise of a bubble. And the thing is here, even though interest rates are coming down and everybody likes to cheer about that happening, unemployment is going up. And the Canadian bank CEOs, they know that this is the case. They're not stupid. They know the unemployment rate is going to offset the interest rate cut by that and much more. They know how much that is going to be impacted. And I'm sure many of you who've actually tried to get in contact with your bank, if it's one of these big 5 banks, will know how difficult that is. Now, why do you think it's so difficult? It's because so many people are calling up and they're trying to defer payments. They're trying to work out payment arrangements with their banks, exactly like during back in the pandemic. It's the exact same thing. In fact, we're getting to the pandemic levels of unemployment and still people are like, oh yeah, it's not too bad. Everything's going to be fine. And we're in this part of the cycle, and we have been for the past couple of years, which is denial. And we're going to be going into the fear cycle soon enough in 2025, maybe in 2026, if it lasts a little longer. This cycle has played out over a long period of time, remember. So that can mean that these things can drag on for a lot longer than you think. At the end of the day, this has been a 20-year cycle in the making. So people who think this is just going to collapse and in 3-4 years everything's going to be off to the races again are really, really naive. You have to realize that. So Canadian young adults face soaring unemployment and unaffordable housing, according to BMO. So this is one of the banks. So dark clouds are forming over Canada's economy, but most households are blissfully unaware for now. A new research note from BMO warns that young adults are facing a gruesome twosome: soaring unemployment and unaffordable housing. The combination has created an environment on par with the country's worst recessions. It's an issue largely slipping under the radar, but considering how fast the wheels are falling off the economy, it may be time to start paying attention. So this is a big bank and it's talking about how this is happening, but you've got to realize that this goes far beyond just soaring unemployment, because the economy has become so dependent on the housing market. In fact, I have a chart here which I want to show you. Now, many of you that have followed the channel will know this chart comes from Bloomberg, but you can see housing dependence, and you've got Japan, the US, UK, Italy, France, Germany, and Canada. And you can see the investment in dwellings as a percentage of gross fixed capital formation 2017 to 2021. And you can see Canada is over 40% here. So that dependence, you're going to pay the price for that. And obviously, a lot of the investors that bought properties that were cash flow negative have really been struggling to carry them and are trying to sell them. Little do they actually realize they're getting out of the race at probably a good point, even though a lot of them are losing money, because it's likely going to get a lot worse as more and more more people, these young people especially, won't be able to afford their rent. Because guess what? It's not just home buyers and people who own their home who are losing their job. A lot of this is actually people who are renting. So then how that affects the housing market, it takes longer because they stop paying their rent. It takes sometimes months to a year to actually get that tenant evicted from there, depending on which province you're in. And then, they might try to sell it or rent it out again. So it takes a while, and a lot of them will hang on to the fact that, hey, prices will just start going up again, because that's what happens in Canada. That's what's happened for the past 10, 20 years. And a lot of these people might have only moved to Canada and seen the bubble whilst it's expanding. So their views are totally skewed. And what the media presents is not the entire picture most of the time. And even what the politicians present, well, that's just to suit their narrative. For instance, like Pierre, he often uses charts. Everything goes from 2015, like the bubble just started in 2015 when it actually started in 2003. All these leaders have presided over this housing bubble at different times, whether it's Pierre, Jagmeet Singh, Trudeau. They've all presided over it. So it's just a case of what's going to happen next. And this bubble has become so big, as we know from the dependency chart, that guess what? It's going to be a huge impact as it implodes. And we're already seeing the scars of that on the economy. So if you've enjoyed this video, I'd highly recommend that you check out that video there. And if you want to help support the channel and get access to exclusive content, go to buymeacoffee.com/market mania, link in the pinned comment. I will see you in the next